The Autism Research Institute relies on the generosity of donors like you to make this webcast possible. If you enjoy this presentation, please consider making a donation. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone to the afternoon session. Is this on? Yeah, good. Welcome to the afternoon session of the AGI Adult Services track. This session, through the rest of the day, will focus on peer-to-peer workshops, which the focus of which is people on the spectrum supporting other people on the spectrum. And as Ken mentioned just now, everyone's welcome, whether you're on the spectrum or not, whether you're an adult or not. But we wanted to just let you know that the focus will be that peer-to-peer process. And if you are a visitor and observer, we really encourage you to take a moment to watch how we support one another. Those of us on the spectrum support each other. That's what this afternoon's all about. So the presentation that I'm currently doing with our Young Leaders Division has to do with a curriculum called the Integrated Self-Advocacy Curriculum, which I developed some years ago when I first initiated a middle and high school for young people on the autism spectrum. After that school sort of closed down, we were in operation for a few years, and then we lost funding from our local public school district. I moved on and began working with a team of people on the Integrated Self-Advocacy curriculum, and it's grown and become very enriched over the years through that process. So today what we'll be sharing with you is two aspects of the curriculum that are sort of foundational in self-advocacy for people on the spectrum, and that is learning to advocate for our social differences and our social needs and preferences, and also learning to advocate for our sensory differences, our needs for sensory accommodations, etc. So just to give you a little background about how I got here, I really wasn't diagnosed with autism, Asperger's syndrome, until I was 42 years old. That was about 8 years ago. And I want to thank my son for leading me to my diagnosis. My son Elijah is 22 years old. He's on the spectrum. And it was really through him that I became very aware of specifically my sensory and social differences, and how it had been impacting my life for many years prior to my diagnosis, and contributed to what I call a lack of awareness of what my advocacy needs were. This is one of my favorite tornado photographs. I have a tornado stim, and I collect tornado images and watch tornado videos on weather.com quite a lot. And I have done this over the years since I was a kid, very interested in meteorological phenomenon, which I also share with Sandra. She's somewhere in the room. Anyway, this image represents for me what life was like for me before self-advocacy. Things would just kind of feel like they happened out of the blue, and quite dramatically and quite suddenly. And I grew up in a big family with lots of kids, and I was always the one who was the complainer, the one who would get car sick on the family road trips and need to stop and get out and, well, puke. I was the one who didn't like going on trips with the family because there were too many social unknowns and sensory unknowns. And that accompanied me through my life. Into my adult years, and I basically believed that story. I was sort of the whiner and the complainer in the family. I was the one who always had something, to pick on about in any kind of environment we were in. And, you know, that was my role in the family before my awareness of autism and Asperger's syndrome. It did follow me, as I said, into my adult life to periods of difficulty with employment and maintaining employment, and a kind of lack of awareness also socially that in order to maintain employment in the settings where I was working, which is at the university level, as a professor of German literature, that you needed to develop allies and sort of work the political climate to achieve tenure. I taught for 13 years, feeling pretty much like maybe what this girl here feels like is there's something in the background about to, you know, really impact my life, but I didn't know it was coming. I just thought if I kept doing my research and publishing like crazy, which I was really good at, someday someone would just walk into the room and say, hey, you're tenured, right? Well, that never happened, and I was surviving hand to mouth, really working from semester to semester with whatever the university would throw me to teach. And it just wasn't a way to achieve any kind of subsistence or sustainability. After my diagnosis, I began to really, really look at how can learning self-advocacy begin to help us help ourselves. And I think quite often when we think of self-advocacy right now in the autism community, there are two things that kind of are misnomers. One is, and this one is my pet peeve lately, if you hear the word self-advocate, people go, oh, that person has autism, as if self-advocate equals person with autism. And actually, all of us are self-advocates, whether you have a disability or not. Everyone in this room is a self-advocate. And it's really important to point that out because we all kind of move through steps of self-advocacy every day in our daily lives. You know, you feel a breeze coming in through a window and you're in a room and you ask someone, could you shut that? That's a form of self-advocacy. And for someone on the spectrum to be able to learn to do something that's seemingly that simple is actually a very giant step. And the steps really involve, first, that self-awareness that I'm talking about. Much of the curriculum that I developed with my colleagues are first about where do we begin, where do we first learn about our senses, where do we first learn about our social needs and preferences. And you don't even need to have to know that you're on the spectrum to become self-aware about your needs. So what I'd like to do is just walk you through some really basic aspects of self-advocacy. If you talk to someone who has advocated for themselves in some way, it could be a person on the spectrum or not, quite often what happens is we move through 3 steps. First, we become aware of a problem. And once we know there's an issue, the second step in a really successful advocacy moment is to develop an advocacy plan. Okay, what am I going to do about it? And when there ever is a need to develop an advocacy plan or to make a request for an accommodation or to take some sort of action, the question always arises as well, do I need to disclose? And what is it that I'm going to disclose? So let's say I have a tendency toward migraines, okay? And my concern is that the lighting in the room may trigger my migraines because I know certain types of lighting trigger migraines. My steps in this process would be, well, I see that specific type of lighting and I may be suffering later if I don't do something about it. So then I make an advocacy plan, and it may be to request, can we shut off the lights, can we dim the lights, can we readjust the lights? One thing that I might decide is I'm going to disclose. I'm a person who gets migraines easily. And quite often the moment of disclosure is the moment of educating another person about the issue so that they don't just feel like this is out of the blue, right? Why does this person want the lights turned off? If I just said, can you turn off the lights? There you go. Well, often for people on the spectrum, that's about as far as we get. You know, oh, it stinks in here. I'm leaving the room, right? We don't even say I'm leaving the room. We just get up and walk out because there's some kind of smell in the room, maybe tuna fish or perfume or somebody's, the soap that somebody uses to shower with earlier in the day. So that's why this piece is so important for us. If we can't get here and become aware really specifically of what our differences are and create a plan, then what you're going to see over and over again from us is what I call ineffective self-advocacy. And sometimes that's labeled behavior as well. You know, if I say, oh my God, you stink, you know, to me that's a form of self-advocacy, but it's ineffective because you're not going to achieve what you need as the person who needs some kind of environmental change. If you're able to have a script or a plan when those issues come up, and also a plan as to whether or not you're going to disclose, whether you need to disclose, you can begin to practice this over and over again in a variety of situations and eventually move from that ineffective place to a much more effective form of self-advocacy, which might even be asking someone, do you think you could not wear perfume when we're together? I can't tell you how many kids in classrooms, in schools around the country where I've worked with this curriculum, have not known that it would be okay to ask their teacher to not wear perfume anymore to class because it was a deal breaker for their learning and their ability to participate. Or for kids who didn't know that the little air freshener mist that goes off every couple of 20 minutes in a classroom. They're in classrooms all around the country. They spray air freshener into the room, that they could actually, first of all, didn't know that that was affecting them in a way that was affecting their learning and access to learning, or affecting their ability to be with their peers in the classroom, right? But then by learning just these simple steps and learning the sensory scan, which we're going to get into in greater depth in a moment, they could actually create an advocacy plan and then implement that plan and have a very successful experience. One note about disclosure: there's lots of different kinds of disclosure. I like to think of it as full or partial. It may be that, I'm in a situation where the lighting, which often does affect me, is very uncomfortable. Maybe in a restaurant and I'm with friends, and I can't sit beneath, the shaft of recessed lighting coming down in wherever our table is at a restaurant. So I may ask whoever I'm with in the restaurant when we're sitting down, do you think we could switch places? I probably wouldn't say, do you think we could switch places? I have autism, right? That would be a full disclosure, but it wouldn't be called for in that moment. It might be called for in other situations where there's law enforcement involved, right? Where you need to let the person who's handcuffing you perhaps or reading you your rights, you need to let them know you're on the spectrum. But what I would do in that restaurant setting is probably give a partial disclosure and just say something like, those lights hurt my eyes. Do you think we could switch places? So it's really that simple if you begin to break things down into 3 steps. And you can even think about in your own life where you might have gone through those 3 steps, maybe even today. And as I said before, we all kind of go through this over and over again. Even if it's like, oh gosh, little breezes make me cold, I get goosebumps. You're disclosing something about yourself. And I think what's probably most powerful for people on the spectrum is that we learn how to do this and manage this for ourselves through practice and through support from staff and parents and anyone else who supports us who gets it, throwing in the behavior plan before you even try this might not be very effective. If you try this and you help the student or the individual or even the adult find a method of advocating for what might need to be changed in the environment, you may be foregoing the need for some kind of behavior plan, which to me is just, I'm going to match this ineffective self-advocacy with something even harder, you know. And we know sometimes those things just escalate and often don't lead to much success. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. We got a bit of a late start, and I want to just sort of bring you into the sensory scan itself. The sensory scan is in this current curriculum called the ISA Integrated Self-Advocacy Curriculum. And some of our young leaders of AGI will be sharing with you their experiences of using the sensory scan. Basically, what the scan is you learn, first of all, what the different sense systems are. If a young person or an adult doesn't yet know, you want to make sure that that person understands what the different sensory systems are. And there are a variety of ways of teaching that, and I can do a whole full day training on that for both non-speaking or speaking individuals. But just so you know, it's possible to take those first basic steps. We've done this in a lot of different settings around the country, and with great success. So if you have questions later, you can certainly ask me about it. How do we teach the sense systems, first of all? I am jumping ahead, but I can also mail the slide set to you at some time. This is a kind of worksheet that we use to teach the sense systems to some people on the spectrum who might not be aware. I can give you one story of a young man in New York City Public School, District 75, who had never been taught the sensory systems, although he was already in high school. He was non-speaking and also had a hearing impairment. And once he learned the sense systems and how to conduct a sensory scan and report back on what in the environment was disruptive for him or difficult, he was able to inform teachers and other staff in the school that actually his hearing device that he wore to help with aiding with hearing was calibrated so high that he was in tremendous pain. And he had never known before that time, one, what all the sense systems were, and two, that he could actually communicate to others, I'm in a lot of pain because of a sensory experience I'm having. Can you please fix my hearing device? And again, he was non-speaking, and we made tremendous progress. And once that happened, he was able to participate in learning. His grades went up. His behaviors, basically disappeared. And this happens over and over again. This is what one version of the sensory scan looks like. This is the scan that both Jeremy and Chloe utilized when they did their scans. And what this does is the scan helps you in any environment scan very methodically what is your experience as the person scanning. And you methodically move through all the different sense systems as you scan. And then you identify by the end of the scan what your top 3 environmental needs are. What is it right now in this environment that is posing a challenge? And once you identify that data, you basically use it to develop an advocacy plan. And the advocacy plan is very much like those 3 steps I mentioned before. The sensory scan itself is the self-awareness step, and it provides a tool for the person on the spectrum, or even the person supporting the person on the spectrum, for developing the self-awareness and identifying concerns or needs in the environment. This step brings you through step 2 of developing your advocacy plan. There's a moment where you can decide, am I going to disclose? Do I need to disclose? If I do, is it going to be a full disclosure or a partial disclosure? And then finally, you carry out the plan and assess the outcome. Getting that feedback helps people revise their plans. figure out if they can use them in other settings. Quite often, for some of us, we may be advocating for similar needs over and over again, and so once we get these steps down, we can apply them in different environments. If it's always the lighting issue, then with time you become very adept at developing an advocacy plan for lighting. These are some examples of other types of sensory scans. They involve an image library. So this is the auditory scan. For right now, it's very hard for me to process because there are too many people speaking at one time. Very common issue for many of us on the spectrum. Or actually, these two people are talking over the person everybody should be listening to. And here, it's just too many voices going on at the same time. Here's one of my favorites, the bad breath scan. And I'm kind of showing you different types of scan prototypes as we go through here. Some of them are all text-based, and they move through a range of text and visual combinations all the way to just only images. So this scan's very easy. You know it's the smell scan. You know it's for bad breath, coffee breath in the classroom or elsewhere. And then, is this making me happy or not so happy? We also have a thumbs up and a thumbs down sign for yes or no. But mainly I just wanted you to see sort of how the curriculum's been built out. We also have flipbook scans where you kind of go through a number of very common things that affect people on the spectrum, and you can interact with the individual or the individual with you as you're going through the flipbook. So here's the fluorescent light scan. It's okay or not okay. Individuals who are non-speaking or have other communication differences or just processing speed issues sometimes find this really useful because they can just point, or they have the language to cue them for what they would like to say in response to that specific scan. So I am going to pass this on to Chloe Rothschild, who is one of our young leaders of AGI, and she's going to share with you her experience of using the sensory scan and going through those 3 steps of self-advocacy that I laid out. Do you want to sit there or do you want to come down here?
I don't care.
It's your choice.
I'll sit here.
Okay.
My name's Chloe Rothschild, and my experience using the ISA self-advocacy scan is what I'm going to talk about. Will you move the slides?
Yeah, you can tell me when to move it.
Now. I did the sensory scan when I was part of a local school transition program out in the community, and one of my daily jobs was to go to a small local food bank, which was basically a small or large walk-in closet with canned foods and other supplies in a large office building with other offices.
Sorry.
It's okay. And so I was going home almost every day, just exhausted, and I had an awful migraine. I was just beside myself. I couldn't do anything else. It ruined the rest of my day. So I said, something's wrong. And then I brought in ISA to my teacher, and I said, I think we need to do this. So she said, all right. So I took it upon myself and took the scan to the food bank. And upon doing the auditory scan, I realized that there were things going on that I had never really realized were really there, like the background noise of the air conditioning and the clock ticking were really distracting, and then people kept coming in to use the microwave, and I could hear people talking in the offices nearby, and just stuff I never realized before because I wasn't thinking about it. And then the visual processing was really a problem there for me because everything was so cluttered and close together, and the lights were a little bright, and that just made the processing a little worse. And in that picture is kind of what the cans look like, and I was expected to check the expiration dates on them. And some days I would go there days in a row, and they would just say, check the expiration dates, check the expiration dates, and each day I would just kind of groan to myself because it was such an easy task, but it was so hard for me to do because there were so many of them. Normally the room smelled fine, but the day I walked in there, on top of everything else, it smelled like someone had cooked tuna fish in the little kitchen attached to the food bank, so that just kind of put one thing on top of another there. In the shelves, as I was putting the food away, they were this really rough wood. Are you okay, Jeremy? And then I did the vestibular scan, and I always really like movement and don't sit still very often, so that's really always a part that I have to think about for me.
Oops, sorry.
It's okay. And the
Did I skip two?
yeah,
Sorry.
it's okay. And then the proprioceptive, the need to rock, spin, or push against things, and I felt like deep pressure would be helpful because I really can't sit still for long periods of time. I concluded that my top 3 environmental needs were auditory, specifically the background noise, and the vestibular and proprioceptive, a hard time sitting still, and then the visual processing.
I'm sorry the formatting's so messed up on this. PowerPoint did a number on Chloe's slides before we could fix them, so.
Then I conducted the sensory advocacy plan. And I concluded that my top sensory need was really that just coping in an environment and where everything was just overwhelming on top of another, really one thing on top of another. And so I came up with a plan, and part of my plan was that I would complete sensory activities such as wearing the weighted vest and riding the exercise bike and taking breaks while at the food bank and before I went to the food bank, and just trying to make it so my system would be already calm before I even went to the food bank. My advocacy script was that if I got to the food bank and I had to leave, I would tell them that I had to leave, or I would call my teacher and say I needed a break and I was coming back to the classroom. My support was my occupational therapist and my teacher, who I both consulted with a lot on this topic. And my final result was that it turned out great and way better than it was. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. I'm not going home every day with a migraine and completely exhausted, and it was great.
Can you explain what that number 3 is?
Yeah, a 3 means that it works successfully.
Great. Thanks, Chloe.
You're welcome.
Oh, and your final thoughts?
Yeah,
Sorry.
this is just that I've used ISA in a number of situations, and it always works and I've always noticed that things always turn out better than they were before.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Jeremy's experience using the sensory scan.
So he's already pre-written it in here.
Okay.
So I'm going to, do these mics work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you can take this
Can
one.
I just, okay. So can you turn the slides?
Yeah.
The slides are basically an outline of this.
Okay.
Here? I don't know because I never use the headphones.
activate self-advocacy plan. Stick fingers in ears.
Exactly.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Got it.
My self-advocacy plan is to always have an IT technician whenever I'm using technology.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Here are the results of my sensory scan worksheet. I did the sensory scan at my local Starbucks September 18th and 19th. There were about 25 to 30 people. Auditory scan. Background noises are distracting kindly. All of the noises from the nice coffee machines. Challenge with number or volume of voices. Having this many voices is always difficult. Difficulty with sudden or irregular noises. The machines again. Visual scan. Light in room is too bright or too dim. Just bright. They are really just bright. Angle of light is difficult from above, below, ECT. No, just bright. Distracted by things hanging on the wall, on surfaces, or in my peripheral vision. Yes. Greatly, really, the menu is distracting. Menu at table is better, like at a restaurant. Frankly, all the above are difficult. Type of light is distracting, or challenging. Yes, it is challenging, because it is just bright. Difficulty reading in this environment, loud noise and bright lights. Other difficulty reading, but not impossible. Olfactory scan. Smell. Smell of objects are distracting, challenging. I very much can smell the coffee and nice perfume of people. Smell of persons is distracting, challenging. I can smell the deodorant and hand cream. It is distracting. The bad smell of the nice great Christina's smoke on her clothes. The general smell of the room is difficult. Yes. Because I cannot nicely block out the unpleasant ones. Other greatly, I can smell the nervousness and anxiety of kind people. Tactile scan. Touch, feel. Generally cannot tolerate others' touch / type of touch. I don't like it when people touch me without asking. I need to prepare my body. Sometimes I don't feel pain the way others do. I really don't know what is meant by pain-free, because I am always in pain. Everything kindly hurts. Challenges with how things or surfaces feel to the touch. Sticky, wet, rough, ECT. I frankly don't like real sticky stuff, nor do I like being wet unless warm. Difficulty with the temperature or drafts. I don't like too cold or too hot. Drafts are bad, but wind is good. Oral / gustatory scan. Tastes or textures on your tongue. Difficulty with the texture or taste of certain foods. I get the sensation that food greatly does not taste much like anything other. Like what I taste, like other environments, home, and restaurants that I am used to. Challenges with mixed foods. I don't in general like my foods mixed up. I like one texture at a time. So even with a Cobb salad that I love, I eat one type of texture at a time. Vestibular scan. How movement affects or does not affect you. Cannot sit for long periods of time if it is too noisy or smelly or bright. I nicely find it difficult to stay sitting. Motion in vehicles is disruptive / makes me feel sick or confused. No, I love moving in cars or any transportation. Would like to spin in circles. No, justly want to stand and rock. Proprioceptive scan. Your body and the space around you. Easily bump into others or the walls. Yes. Justly, I can't tell where my body begins and ends. Trouble writing on paper. Graphomotor. Yes. Cannot sit for long periods of time. Yes. Frankly, I can't sit in uncomfortable places for very long. Need to rock, bounce, or press against other things or people, yes. Kindly rocking helps. Difficulty using stairs or walking down an incline, yes. I justly feel lost in space. My top 3 environmental needs: auditory, visual, olfactory. Sensory advocacy plan for my auditory needs. My sensory top need. My top need is for an environment that is not too noisy. For example, at the Starbucks near me, I sometimes need for it to nicely be quieter. Kindly, there are a lot of different noises, like the coffee machines, and everyone there speaking at the same time. What is my top sensory goal? My top goal is to recognize when it is too noisy before I get overwhelmed. When it is loud, it would help to have on the table my nice book that I carry every day as a transition item. Flipping the pages helps keep me calm. Kindly moving somewhere quieter helps in the beginning, before I'm overwhelmed. My second goal is kindly to be able to communicate when I'm overwhelmed. Can I address my sensory needs independently without a script? If so, how? Nicely, it helps me when I kindly am able to use a break card. Really, the easiest way for me is to greatly have on the table a break card. I can touch the break card before standing up and leaving, so my support person knows I need to leave. Kindly, it helps just to set a limit of time when it is loud before we sit down. Just making sure there is an exit close makes me feel more comfortable. Do I need someone to support me, translator or mentor? If so, how? Kindly, I always frankly need support, such as my communication partner / support staff. Nicely, it always helps when Ted or a calm support person is with me. Having a support staff helps because they get everything ready on the table so I can communicate. Like greatly my iPad, my nice book that is a transition item, and break card. Also, whenever I need something I cannot get myself, I can communicate to them, and they can help me get it.
Thanks, Jeremy. Campbell Teague was also going to be here, but if any of you were with us yesterday, Campbell, he's another one of our young leaders at AGI, but he has walking pneumonia and couldn't make it, but I may be able to share a bit of his scan with you a little later. Very briefly, I'm going to just introduce you also to the social scan, which is another kind of scan in the ISA curriculum. And it's essentially the same as the sensory scan, where an individual is supported in learning how to scan an environment, but it's more for the social experience that that person is having, and to identify if there are specific social differences that are making it difficult to be in that environment, or that could be addressed, needs or preferences that could be addressed in order to be in that environment or feel more effective in that environment. Similar to Chloe's sensory scan, you know, she wanted to be effective in her environment in spite of the visual differences that she experiences with the sorting of the cans. And very similarly, for many of us on the spectrum, I think one of the really important things to point out about the social scan is we're not all alike socially as social creatures. All of us in this room, there are extroverts in this room, there are introverted types in this room, there are lots of different personalities in this room, and that is very much the same among people on the spectrum. We're not all sort of one type of person, and therefore I think one of the most important and challenging aspects of the social scan is it's really important to value the person and their personality and their social tendencies and needs, as well as support them in social skills development. And social skills development doesn't always mean you're going to mimic what the neurotypical standard is, because really we're all very different and we all have different standards. I tend to be a quieter person in many respects, and I would not want someone to force me to be more social, right? So with the social scan, you actually learn, if you're a support person or an educator or a therapist, of walking that fine line of really acknowledging the person and also supporting their social development. Learning how to advocate for your social needs and preferences is an incredible form of social skills learning. And that's a really essential takeaway point if you're concerned, you know, like, oh, well, my son just wants to walk and leave the room, you know. He doesn't want to interact with others. Well, one of my son's social advocacy plans is when there's too many people in the room, like a big family party, he will approach an aunt or an uncle and say, hey, can you and I go in the other room and socialize there and be together there? And for years, he was the kid who would just get up and walk out. But with the social scan, he found ways to both honor who he is socially in his, you know, deep personality of who he is, but also honor his social differences and learn social skills. You know, he went from what I call the ineffective self-advocacy of just walking out of the room to approaching a favorite aunt or uncle and having a script and saying, would you mind going with me to the other room? And moving into more effective social advocacy. So the social scan is also very methodical. It breaks down the environment into lots of different parts, you know, whether it's how many people are in the room, what is the content of the room, what's being discussed. Is it a loose social gathering, you know, like the dreaded cocktail party for me? You know, I have nothing I can contribute in those situations, I feel. But if it's very structured and I can talk about work, then I'm fine. So those kinds of things and that kind of self-awareness can be fostered and developed using the social scan. And again, we got some reformatting issues with the PowerPoint here, but these are little close-up views of the social scan. And just like the sensory scan, we've built this out to include individuals who learn and work better with different types of visual supports or a combination of visual supports and text. These are some of the images from the social scan for visual learners or people who really do well seeing examples. This is about group size or situations like this where you're not quite sure what the expectations are or what's going on. Just to be able to do a scan and even know that is a huge step towards self-awareness for someone on the spectrum. What are the expectations in a classroom, whether it's at college or school or elsewhere? So these are just some images from that series. We also have a bullying and harassment scan. How do you identify if you're being harassed at work or bullied at school? How do you even know what that might look like? And then what can you do in terms of developing a social advocacy plan to address those issues? So I think what I'm going to do, because we have about 5 minutes, is offer you, if you want the slide set and to see Campbell, Teague's notes on his social scan, you can email me at agi@autism.com, and I will send them to you. And I won't be showing Campbell's slides here, and instead I'd just like to open up for maybe 1 or 2 final questions that you might have for anyone on the presentation.
The Autism Research Institute relies on the generosity of donors like you to make this webcast possible. If you enjoy this presentation, please consider making a donation. Thank you.